Why ancient humans' skin changed with the sun. Long ago, before cities, before countries, before agriculture even existed, there was a human being walking across the African savanna. No clothes, no shelter, no sunscreen. Just them, the heat, and a sun that showed no mercy. And that sun, without anyone asking, without anyone planning it, slowly began changing the skin of that being. Generation after generation. Century after century, until it shaped something we take for granted today but that hides an extraordinary story, the diversity of skin colors across humanity. Today we're going to tell that story, and I promise you, by the time you're done listening, you'll never look at the sun the same way again. Let's start from the very beginning. About 6 million years ago, the common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees lived in Africa, covered in fur like virtually every other mammal. And underneath that fur, the skin was light. Not by choice, but because the fur protected it from the sun, and there was no evolutionary reason for it to be any other color. But Africa's climate began to change. The dense forests that covered much of the continent slowly dried out. In their place came savannas, open plains, hot and shadeless. Our ancestors had to adapt to that new world. And one of the most important adaptations was, precisely, losing body hair. Why lose fur if fur protects you from the sun? Because on the savanna, the biggest enemy wasn't the sun, it was heat. And fur traps heat. To be able to run for miles chasing prey or escaping a predator, the body needed to cool itself efficiently. Evolution's solution was spectacular, a powerful sweating system with millions of glands in the skin, far more efficient than that of any other primate. The problem was that without fur, the skin was left completely exposed, naked under the African sun. And that's where everything began. Ultraviolet radiation, UV, is invisible to the human eye, but the body feels it. When it reaches the skin, it can do two very different things, and understanding those two things is the key to understanding this entire story. The first thing UV radiation does is destroy folic acid. Folic acid, also called folate, is an essential vitamin. Without it, the body can't produce DNA correctly. And during pregnancy, folate deficiency can cause devastating birth defects, like spina bifida, a failure in the development of the spinal column that can be fatal or cause permanent disability. Think about what that means in the context of a small population of early humans. If pregnant women were losing folate because the sun was destroying it in their blood, babies were born with serious problems. Many didn't survive. And those who did had far fewer chances of reproducing. Women with more melanin in their skin, those with darker skin, blocked that radiation more effectively and protected their folate. Their babies were born healthier. More of them survived. And they inherited that darker skin. Repeated over thousands and thousands of generations, this gradually darkened the skin of humans living near the equator. Natural selection has no intention. It has no plan. But it operates with a brutal and simple logic. What helps you survive and reproduce stays. What doesn't, disappears. This is where the main character of our story enters, melanin. Melanin is the pigment that gives skin its color. It's produced by cells called melanocytes, located in the deepest layer of the epidermis. And here's something most people don't know. Every person, regardless of their skin color, has roughly the same number of melanocytes. What changes is not how many pigment-producing cells you have, but how much melanin they produce and what type. There are two main types. Eumelanin, which is dark, brown, or black, and pheomelanin, which is lighter, reddish, or yellowish. People with darker skin produce far more eumelanin. Those with lighter skin produce less eumelanin and proportionally more pheomelanin. What exactly does eumelanin do? It acts as a shield. It absorbs UV radiation before it reaches the deeper layers of the skin and damages cellular DNA. Imagine a tiny molecular umbrella unfolded over the nucleus of each cell. In very dark skin, that umbrella is so efficient it can block a significant portion of incoming radiation. But that shield comes at a cost. And that cost is exactly what explains why human skin isn't dark everywhere in the world. The same UV radiation that destroys folate also does something completely different and necessary. It triggers the production of vitamin D. When UVB, the specific type of ultraviolet radiation that penetrates deepest into the skin, hits the skin surface, it converts a molecule already present there, called 7-dehydrocholesterol, into vitamin D3. That vitamin is then processed by the liver and kidneys into the active form the body needs. And what does vitamin D do? Nearly everything. It enables calcium absorption and strong bones. It supports the immune system. It regulates hormones. It helps the heart function properly. A severe deficiency in children causes rickets, a disease that deforms the bones. In adults, it weakens the skeleton and deeply compromises health. Now, if melanin blocks UV radiation, it also blocks the production of vitamin D. And this is the perfect evolutionary dilemma. In Africa, near the equator, intense sunlight is present year-round. Even very dark skin receives enough radiation to produce the necessary vitamin D. The sun is so strong that melanin can partially block it without compromising vitamin D production. But what happens when humans leave Africa and go to live at higher latitudes, where the sun is weaker, where in winter daylight lasts only a few hours and the sun barely appears above the horizon? About 70,000 years ago, groups of Homo sapiens began leaving Africa. They didn't do it all at once. It was slow, generation by generation, following the coastline, crossing deserts, moving through the steppes. They reached the Middle East, then Asia, then Europe, and much later, they crossed the far northern edge of the world to reach the Americas. As those groups moved farther from the equator, the sun changed. Not in temperature, but in angle and intensity. In northern Europe, in winter, the sun stays low on the horizon for months. The UVB radiation reaching the surface is minimal. And with dark skin, under those conditions, vitamin D production becomes nearly impossible. The consequences were real and deadly. Bones weakened. Children developed rickets. Women's pelvises deformed, making childbirth far more dangerous. The immune system deteriorated. People got sick and died before having children, or had fewer children who survived. And then natural selection, that force without consciousness but utterly relentless, pushed again. This time, in the opposite direction. People with genetic mutations that reduced melanin production, that lightened the skin, could make better use of the limited northern light. They produced more vitamin D with less sun. Their bones were stronger. Their deliveries safer. Their bodies more resilient. They survived more, had more children, and those children inherited their lighter skin. Slowly, the populations that settled in Europe and northern Asia began losing melanin. Lightning. The equatorial sun had darkened skin. The northern sun gradually lightened it. The same star, working in opposite directions, depending on where on the planet you happen to be standing. There's something in this story that surprises even scientists, and that contradicts what most people assume. Modern Europeans haven't always had light skin. Very pale skin in Europe is, in evolutionary terms, surprisingly recent. Ancient DNA studies have proven this decisively. Just 10,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers living in Europe, in what is now Spain, Hungary, and England, had much darker skin than Europeans today. One of the most studied cases is the so-called Cheddar Man, found in a cave in England and dated to about 9,000 years ago. DNA analysis showed he likely had dark skin and blue eyes, a combination that seems exotic to us today but was completely normal at the time. European skin truly lightened when two major waves of migration arrived. First, farmers from the Middle East about 8,000 years ago, who already carried some genetic variants associated with lighter skin. Then, nomadic herders from the Central Asian steppes about 5,000 years ago, who brought even more of those variants. It was that mixture of populations with their different genes that produced the skin of modern Europeans. And the most intense lightening happened in the last 6,000 to 7,000 years, a blink of an eye on the evolutionary timescale. This matters because it tells us something important. Skin color is not a fixed trait of any human group from the beginning of time. It's an adaptation that shifts, that moves, that evolves alongside migrations and environments. The story of our skin is always being rewritten. Now, if the story stopped there, East Asians would have the same skin as Europeans. They live at similar latitudes, receive a comparable amount of sunlight, and yet their skin characteristics are different. Because they arrived at the same destination by a different road. The lighter skin of Europeans and the lighter skin of East Asians are not produced by the same genetic mutations. The genes involved are different. The molecular pathways are different. But the adaptive result is similar: skin with less melanin to make better use of the sun at higher latitudes. Biologists call this convergent evolution. It's when two separate populations, geographically isolated from each other, independently develop similar solutions to the same problem. It's like two cooks in separate kitchens without talking to each other, inventing the same recipe. Nature has many roads that lead to the same place. And the Americas, where do they fit into all of this? The first Americans arrived from Asia at least 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, crossing what is now the Bering Strait. They were populations that had already lived at cold latitudes and carried with them adaptations to cold and low sunlight. When they reached the American continent, they found an enormous and wildly diverse world. Some groups stayed in the far north, in the Arctic. Others pushed south, all the way to the tropical rainforests of Central and South America, where the sun was just as intense as in Africa. In those tropical regions, the evolutionary pressure was identical to equatorial Africa: more melanin to protect folate and shield against intense solar radiation. And indeed, indigenous populations living in tropical regions of the Americas have darker skin than those in the north. But there's a fascinating special case worth pausing on: the Arctic peoples, like the Inuit. The Inuit live at extreme latitudes, with months of near total darkness. According to the vitamin D logic, they should have very light skin. But they don't. Their skin is considerably darker than one would expect. Because their diet explains everything. The Inuit eat enormous quantities of fatty fish, seal liver, whale meat, and other marine foods, all of which are extraordinarily rich in vitamin D. They don't need to produce it in their skin because they consume it directly in what they eat. Evolution didn't need to lighten their skin because the vitamin D problem was already solved through another channel entirely. That tells us something fascinating: evolution doesn't follow a single path. It uses whatever is available. If there's sunlight, it adjusts the skin. If there's vitamin D-rich food, it may not need to touch the skin at all. It's improvised, opportunistic engineering, brilliant in its own way. There is one point in this story that simply cannot go unsaid. Everything we've described, melanin, folate, vitamin D, migrations, mutations, these are adaptations. They are biology's responses to an environment. They are not markers of intelligence. They are not indicators of ability. They have nothing to do with morality, with culture, or with the worth of a person. Science is absolutely clear on this. The genes that determine skin color represent a minuscule fraction of the human genome. And those genes are not linked to cognitive ability, to creativity, to moral character, to anything other than pigmentation and a handful of adaptations related to sunlight. Two people from anywhere in the world share more than 99.9% of their DNA. The genetic diversity within any human group, whatever it may be, is greater than the average diversity between different groups. We separated from our common African origins relatively recently in evolutionary terms, and evolution simply hasn't had enough time to differentiate us in any deep way. Skin color is a superficial adaptation in the most literal sense of the word. It is on the surface. It is the outermost layer of human biology responding to its environment, and nothing more. There is something I find genuinely beautiful about all of this, and I want you to sit with it for a moment. The sun, that enormous star 93 million miles away, has been quietly sculpting the appearance of human beings for hundreds of thousands of years. Without anyone knowing. Without anyone choosing it. Guided only by the blind logic of natural selection. Every person born with a little more melanin in a region of intense sunlight had a small but real advantage. Their children inherited that advantage. And their children's children. And so, over thousands of generations, the skin of entire populations shifted, adjusted, responded to the sun of their environment like a plant turning toward the light. And at the same time, in the frozen north, The opposite process unfolded. Every person with a little less melanin, better able to capture the scarce winter light, had a small but real advantage too. They also passed it to their children. And over thousands of generations, skin shifted in the other direction. The sun was the sculptor. Melanin was the material. Time was the tool. And the result is us. Every shade and tone and hue that covers humanity from one end of the earth to the other. Today we live in a world where those ancient evolutionary pressures no longer govern our lives in the same way. We take vitamin D supplements. We wear sunscreen. We spend most of the day indoors. We eat fortified foods. Technology has created a distance between us and the conditions that shaped our biology. But our genes don't know that. They're still carrying instructions written thousands of years ago for a completely different world. That's why people with darker skin living far from the equator are more prone to vitamin D deficiency. And why people with lighter skin in tropical regions face greater risks from sun damage and skin cancer. Our bodies are still living in the past. And that, in itself, is a lesson about who we are. We are creatures of time, shaped by millions of years of history that we carry in every single cell. So the next time you feel the sun on your face, think about this. That light warming you has been doing so much more than brightening the world. It has been writing on the skin of our species, word by word, generation by generation, a story that none of us chose but that all of us carry. Every person's skin color is a page of that story. A geographic record. An echo of where their ancestors lived, what kind of sun they faced, what challenges they endured and overcame. It is a story written by the universe. And it belongs to all of us, no matter what tone that story left on our skin.